Morning, I'm Blake Kurd. I'm the South Dakota Republican Senate Majority Leader. It's a pleasure to be here with you all again this morning, and I look forward to your questions.
Good morning, Representative Lee Quam. I'm the House Majority Leader, and looking forward to your questions as well. We just want to get started.
Good morning. There have been about 20 bills filed that have to do with the initiated measure process, petition, circulating, etc. There are some who've been involved in that process that have called them an unprecedented attack on the initiated measure process. Can each of you speak to what sort of proposals you would support in that arena and which you might say no to, which you think might move too far in that direction?
Well, we just had a bill in State Affairs this morning where originally it said you had to have your residential address, email, that type of thing. We took the residential address out. We figured that was a little too far reaching. I think the thought process is there's a lot of out-of-state people coming in and getting signatures, and that's really not how it's supposed to be done. It's supposed to be South Dakota residents are doing it. Matter of fact, at the state fair, I had a gentleman from Omaha. He approached me. I asked him where he was from. He said, "Oh, I'm from Omaha." And he was not hesitant to say that. And he was just staying in a hotel room for a while to get signatures. And I think we just need a little more clarity on this, and I see nothing wrong with making sure that we have South Dakota residents doing it.
For me, I approach every option for changing the initiative measure process with some caution. I like to evaluate them all. Certainly there's a lot of interest because of the political activity over the last couple of years, and so I think whenever something like that bubbles to top of mind for so many individuals, you're going to see lots of attempts to adjust and modify, and I don't think any of the proposals that are out there are unworthy of discussion. I can't tell you at this point how many of them will survive, obviously, but I don't think that just because people bring things up to talk about them that it rises to the level of an attack or a threat. So the opportunity to have discussions about our initiated measure process, I think, are certainly valid and worth the time, energy, and expense of the legislature. As you know, South Dakota was the first state to bring this process up. So if you had the same discussion back so long ago, you would say this is an unprecedented attack on our ability to initiate laws, and so you could have the same discussion then. So I don't think it's anything that the public should be fearful of. They should engage in a conversation and enjoy the deliberative process, and we'll see what survives at the end of the session. What was your question again?
The question was about the many measures that have been brought forward regarding the initiative process.
Sure. Well, as the other two have said, I think in my approach, a lot of my constituents have asked if there's any way we can provide some more clarity through the process, and I think that's when I'm looking at this. I'm looking at things that can offer some clarity. For example, House Bill 1005 was the recitation bill. It's over into the Senate now, but I think it's trying to make some things more clear and concise as people are heading into the ballot box. Things along those lines, I think, are certainly worthy of a closer look, and the rest is up to the people to decide in the legislature, and we'll see what happens.
One thing rises to top of mind for me, Dana. I think you look at some of the proposals that have been put forward, such as applying the process to putting a fiscal cost on initiated measures that have one. So the folks that are large proponents of open government and transparency reject almost out of hand applying the same openness and transparency to the initiative measure process. It seems like a dichotomy. I don't know what they're afraid of. If we're looking at a potential change to state law through the IM process that costs millions and millions of dollars, what's wrong with the public knowing that? We certainly get the possibility to debate it here in the legislature, and it's a little bit of an overused metaphor, but it's a goose and gander situation, I think. If it's good for us to know, it's good for us to know, and the public ought to know as well.
Yeah, I would certainly concur with what's been said, and you know, my constituents, when they talk about it, they said, you know, there's so much information that we don't have, and it's really hard. You know, the AG can only have 200 words to talk about a 34-page piece of potential amendment, and that's very difficult to do. So I think if we can get them more information, the better. And these people shouldn't feel like we're going after them when we just ask for more information, just more clarity. I think it helps everybody do a better job when they make the vote.
Some of these proposals obviously come after last year in the 2016 election when we saw a lot of out-of-state money come into the state to influence these elections. A couple of proposals that seem to have out-of-state influence tied to them. How do you balance restricting out-of-state interest on the ballot, but also allowing grassroots groups in the state to access it?
There's no one answer to that question, and I can't give you one. I think a large measure of this question has been answered by the Supreme Court, and that makes it difficult for us to do things that would try to trump or override that. I know the Speaker has a different opinion, but I think because of the Supreme Court decision about political speech, I think it makes it very difficult for us here to write state law that would attempt to override federal law.
I guess I would agree with the previous speaker. It's very difficult. You know, free speech allows anyone to do anything, basically. You know, you can't start limiting things. And we just need to be careful what we do. That we don't want to limit, but by the same token, we want to make things more open.
Well, I think it's a delicate balance between, you know, restriction and transparency. And, you know, and it's hard to kind of have both sometimes, so.
Then we're gonna start getting some fiscal numbers in the next 2 weeks, any sense of where budgets might be at, and any change in priorities, if it's good.
Well, right now, it's looking like the numbers could be getting a little better. I mean, that's a report we have. We haven't actually seen any numbers yet, but that's kind of the perception, is that it's going to be a little better. And I'm not going to say any priorities change until we see what it is. It's, you know, we can have that discussion once we kind of have a better note. In a couple of weeks, we'll have a lot better idea where we're at, and then we can have the discussion, because I think everybody's got their priorities out there, and you know, we'll just have to see what it is. At this point, we just don't know. But it does look a little better than what we were perceiving at first.
I think Lee's right. There's some cautious optimism in the economic forecast. I think you've seen that nationally. That exists here in South Dakota as well. We should have sales tax receipts from December available first part of next week, and then, as you mentioned, in February, the legislature will adopt a revenue estimate for fiscal 2019, and should have a much better look at what the rest of 2018 looks like. Some of that optimism is driven clearly by this significant congressional tax cut that was just passed at the end of last year, or just recently, excuse me. So I think that gives the folks that look at long-term economic forecasts some optimism. More money in the piggy bank at home means more in the economy, and I think it's a great step forward for the country, and I think we'll probably see that play out here in South Dakota as well to some degree. To how large a measure, I don't know yet, obviously, but time will tell. So cautiously optimistic, but probably not a meteoric rise in revenues, at least at this point.
I think the wild card, you know, as usual in South Dakota, is our agriculture industry. The leader and myself live that every single day. We do have a fairly large supply of inventory sitting in our bins at home, and we have to work through that process as well. and, see what the rest of the world does for their crop as well this time of year down in South America. And so that's gonna have an effect, and obviously we deal with weather here every growing season. And you never hope for a drought to help raise prices, because that's not good. So we need to continue to find ways to create demand within our agriculture industry, and hopefully that can help bring the tide up a little bit as well.
The Senate Judiciary Committee is set to consider a campus free speech bill today. Have any of you read it? Do you have any thoughts on that proposal at this time?
In general, I'm 100% supportive of people's right to freedom of speech, and if this bill in the Senate Judiciary helps to ensure that without restriction on college campuses, then I think it's a great step forward. We'll have to see what its final format is after it comes out of the committee. As you know, it's subject to amendment and changes, and so we'll have to see what the final format is. But in concept, in theory, I think I'm supportive, as is most of the GOP.
It's actually going to be in House Judiciary. That's where I'm heading right after this. So we'll, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting debate to see, kind of conceptually the idea. I think makes a lot of sense. As you get into the details of it, as always, it's always open for interpretation. The question I always ask in these is there a problem that we're trying to fix? Does this address the problem? And we'll see if that matches up.
I would certainly agree with what the assistant leader said, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here. Is there a problem, and does this fix it? I know there's some places where I think we do have a problem. If this will help, I think that's fine. I think it's a good deal.
There were also a handful of bills filed yesterday. Well, generally there were more than that, as you well know. But a few that dealt with suspending refugee resettlement in South Dakota from certain countries listed on the president's travel ban list. And also bringing penalties for cities that would aim to become sanctuary cities for undocumented individuals. Do you have any thoughts on those proposals? Do you think it's important for the state to have sort of veto power over who comes into South Dakota?
I'll take a stab at it first. Immigration and refugee resettlement is a federal issue, and the state has very limited things that it can do towards that regard. That's been litigated at the Supreme Court level before. So our ability to kind of modify or attempt to take steps that would change what's already been established in law is going to be an extraordinarily difficult lift for us. I think the bills that would attempt to do that you reference are probably more of a political statement than a political reality. In concert with that, the resolution that calls on Congress to find the root cause of this terrorism battle that we're engaged in, I think is a reasonable step. And if our president and the State Department decides that there's too great a risk to accept refugees and immigrants from a certain area of the world because of the threat it poses to the country, I think our job here in South Dakota is to support the president and the Department of State in that decision.
I think there's some legitimate questions there. Obviously on the immigration, the state is extremely limited in what we can do. That's federal policy. But I would concur as long as we can go with what the president and his staff, legislature, Congress decides what to do. That's really where we have to go with it. For us to make a wholesale change of what we want to do, number one, I don't think we can, and number two, I think it would be a very bad idea to try.
There have also been 3 bills filed that specifically deal with signage near restrooms and/or the teaching of gender identity in primary and secondary schools. Do
That hasn't risen to my desk to review those at this point, so I don't have comment today on those.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess I haven't seen those also. I know we had that discussion a couple of years ago, with the idea being some of those issues are best handled on the local level. But obviously, we'll probably revisit them again here. So.
Yeah, I have not seen them, so I will reserve comment until I get a chance to read it and see what it says.
We're nearing a final total for bills. It's looking like it's over 500 at this point. Any thoughts about how you're going to get through all of it? What the next couple weeks are going to be like?
Well, as far as House State Affairs, we have already decided that on Tuesday after session and Wednesday after session, we are going to hold meetings just to get through. We don't want to wait till the end to go get through bills, so we're just going to tackle it and get it done. We'll get it done. I alluded to, I think, last week that we may have to burn some midnight oil, and I think that's what's going to happen to get it all done.
Sure, and I serve on the House Judiciary Committee as well, which is probably also, with the State Affairs and Judiciary, probably the two highest bill volume committees we have. And I know we are going to continue in that committee as well to, we have the nice part of that one, it comes up against the noon hour, so we can oftentimes run a little later if we want to. But I'm guessing there's going to be many potential committees that are going to be meeting beyond session, just to process all of the bills.
One bill at a time.
You've spoken to this a little bit before, but what do you think is contributed to the higher volume this year?
Well, yeah, like I've said before, the governor in the final year of his term, no major initiative coming off a summer study led by the potential governor's office executive branch. It's an election year. People are trying to, if there's any particular issue or idea that they're very passionate about, this is their opportunity to bring it forward and go back to their constituencies and say, whether or not it passed or not, I at least tried to offer this amongst the other legislators. And so I think all of those kind of combine to affect our bill volume.
I really don't have anything to add. I mean, I would agree with everything that the assistant leader said. A lot of different reasons. I don't think there's one specific thing that's garnering more bills than the other. Everybody is just feeling that they need to, they have a good reason for what they do and they want to see what happens.
For me, I think it's threefold. Number one, new folks more comfortable with how things work here in Pierre at the Capitol, and therefore more eager to engage than they might have been in their first year in service. Second variable is those that are term limited and leaving the legislature, looking at their last attempt to accomplish things that are important to them. And the third thing, we've alluded to it some here today, but it's people making political statements for other offices that they're attempting to seek and using the legislature as a soapbox for that purpose, instead of really concentrating and focusing on what's good law and good policy for people that live here.
Would you hope that some of those soapbox proposals maybe get tabled, or?
I think you'll see some of them not survive the legislative process for certain.
And that's why we have the committee process. I mean, every bill that comes here gets a hearing, and that won't change whether we necessarily agree with the issue or not. It's important to somebody. So our duty is to let the process work the way it's supposed to, and it usually does.
We should just have the Dana Ferguson press conference next week because no one else has questions. So.
Thank you all. I know you have 10 o'clock to get to. So.
Thanks a bunch. We'll see you next week.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.